Heartbreaking death of diver Emily Parker pulled by Orca. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The Pacific waters shimmered under the early morning sun, the vast blue expanse stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A cool breeze rolled across the deck of the Sequest, the research vessel that had become a second home to Emily Parker, an experienced marine biologist and one of the most respected orca researchers in the field. The sea was calm that morning, deceptively peaceful, as Emily suited up for what should have been a routine dive. She stood near the edge of the boat, adjusting her oxygen tank as she double-checked her dive equipment. The team was preparing to conduct an observational study on a known pod of orcas that frequented these waters, a group Emily had spent the past 2 years tracking. But today, something felt different. The tension lingered in the air, subtle yet undeniable. The radio chatter was light, but there was an underlying unease in the way her team moved. "You sure about this, Emily?" Ryan Mitchell, her longtime dive partner, asked, watching her closely as she tightened the straps on her gear. The pod was acting off yesterday. Something didn't feel right. Emily gave him a small, reassuring smile. "They're wild animals, right? Their behavior changes all the time. We just have to observe and adapt." Ryan exhaled sharply, nodding, but the concern in his eyes didn't fade. Neither of them could have known that this would be Emily's final dive. With a final check of her equipment, she stepped onto the metal diving platform, the ocean beckoning below. The water was a deep, dark blue, endless and unknown. Taking a slow breath, she adjusted her mask, gave a thumbs up to the crew, and then she plunged in. The cold hit her immediately, a familiar shock that sent a shiver through her spine before she adjusted to the temperature. As she descended, the world above blurred into rippling light, and the silence of the deep took over. The ocean had a way of swallowing sound, leaving only the distant hum of marine life and the slow, rhythmic hiss of her own breathing through the regulator. She activated her underwater camera, adjusting the angle as she scanned the depths. Schools of small fish darted past her, the occasional jellyfish drifting lazily in the open water. The orcas were supposed to be here. The GPS tracker had placed them in this location just yesterday. Then, movement in the distance. Her heart skipped as she turned, catching sight of a shadow slicing through the water. It was them. A pod of orcas, majestic, powerful, and breathtaking in their grace, moved just ahead of her, their sleek black and white forms stark against the deep blue. Emily exhaled slowly, watching in quiet. This was why she had dedicated her life to the ocean, to these creatures that carried an intelligence beyond what many understood. She counted 6 individuals, swimming in synchronized motion, their bodies weaving effortlessly through the currents. The largest among them, a male with a towering dorsal fin, led the group, while 2 juveniles flanked his sides. Emily kept her distance, her training ingrained in every movement: observe, document, but never interfere. She activated her radio. "I have a visual on the pod. 6 individuals. They appear calm." Ryan's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Copy that. Any signs of stress behavior?" Emily scanned their movements. No aggression. No rapid movements. There, she paused, her brow furrowing. Something was off. The pod was moving, but not as a unit. One of them lagged behind. A smaller orca, slightly separated from the group, was circling slowly, its movements less fluid, more erratic. Emily narrowed her eyes, watching carefully. This was unusual. Orcas were highly social creatures. Separation was not common unless something was wrong. She adjusted her position, swimming slightly closer. The lone orca tilted its head toward her, locking eyes for just a moment. A shiver crawled down Emily's spine. Something about its gaze felt unnatural. "Ryan," she murmured into the radio, her voice quieter now. "One of them is behaving strangely." "Define strangely," Ryan responded, tension creeping into his voice. Emily hesitated. "It's circling, moving differently, and it's looking right at me." Ryan was silent for a beat. Then, "Emily, I don't like this. If something feels off, get back to the surface." She exhaled slowly. "Not yet. I need a closer look." Ignoring the unease curling in her stomach, Emily took another careful stroke forward. The orca did not move away. Instead, it moved toward her. The shift was almost imperceptible, but Emily felt it rather than saw it. The orca's movements changed, no longer curious, no longer passive. Its body tensed, its sleek muscles coiling in a way that sent every instinct in her body screaming. Predatory. Emily had spent years studying these creatures. She knew their signals, their language. And right now, this orca was sending a message. But what was it trying to say? Ryan, her voice was sharper now, her breath coming faster. Something's wrong. It's watching me. The radio crackled. Emily, ascend. No. She adjusted her buoyancy, kicking her legs to begin her slow rise toward the surface. Her heart pounded in her chest, every nerve on edge. And then the orca moved. Fast. Too fast. Emily barely had time to register the blur of black and white before she felt the force of something slamming into her leg. A sharp jerk pulled her downward, violently yanking her away from the surface. Her world tilted as she spiraled, her oxygen bubbles streaming around her in frantic swirls. The orca had her. Its powerful jaws clamped onto her ankle, not enough to pierce, but enough to drag, enough to pull her into the abyss. She thrashed, twisting her body, but the grip was unrelenting. The radio exploded with shouts. Emily, what's happening? Are you okay? Emily barely managed to press the transmission button, her voice breaking. It's got me. It's dragging me down. Panic surged through her veins as she struggled against the crushing weight of the ocean pressing in around her. The surface light was getting further away. The blue was darkening, swallowing her whole. The orca's grip tightened. Then, without warning, it let go. Emily kicked hard, spinning herself upward. Freedom. She was free. But the moment her body shifted, the orca struck again. This time, the grip was harder. It wasn't playing anymore. This was something else. Something far more terrifying. The last thing Emily saw before the darkness swallowed her completely was the blurred outline of the boat far, far above her, a world she would never reach again. The world above shrunk into a distant shimmer, a fading promise of safety as Emily was dragged deeper into the abyss. Every survival instinct screamed at her to fight, to kick, to struggle, to break free. But the crushing pressure of the water made each movement sluggish, her strength useless against the sheer power of the orca. Her mind raced, oxygen burning in her lungs as the panic set in. Orcas weren't supposed to behave this way. She had studied them for years, spent her career defending them against misconceptions, arguing against the outdated belief that they were merciless killers. They were intelligent, social creatures, capable of forming complex emotional bonds. So why was this happening? Through the distortion of the water, she saw the orca's eye, a cold, glassy black void that reflected nothing back. Not curiosity, not recognition, just emptiness. The orca's grip was firm but controlled, not crushing, not tearing. It wasn't hunting her. But it wasn't letting her go either. She reached for her dive knife, fingers trembling as she struggled to pull it from its holster. She had to act now. Just as she freed the blade, the orca released her. The sudden shift sent her tumbling backward, her body twisting in the water. Her chest heaved as she gulped in precious oxygen, her thoughts colliding in a frantic blur. Had it changed its mind? Was it done with her? A second passed. Then two. Then, with terrifying precision, the orca struck again. This time, it rammed into her from below, slamming its massive body into her torso. The impact rattled her bones, knocking the knife from her grasp. It vanished into the darkness, spiraling out of reach. The orca circled her now, moving in slow, deliberate arcs, toying with her. A sharp pain bloomed in her ribs. Was it broken? She couldn't tell. The pain blurred with the cold, with the suffocating grip of the deep. The radio crackled faintly in her ear, distorted by the increasing pressure. Distant voices, her team, screaming her name. She tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth had finally sunk in. She wasn't going to make it. On the boat, chaos erupted. Ryan gripped the radio, so tightly his knuckles turned white. Emily, respond. Do you copy? Emily. Static. Only static. The crew was already moving, launching the emergency dive team, preparing the oxygen tanks, securing the retrieval cables. Ryan could hear the splash of bodies hitting the water, the rush of footsteps on the deck. Her oxygen levels are dropping fast. Someone shouted from the monitoring station. If she doesn't surface in 2 minutes, she's out of time. Ryan's heart pounded. 2 minutes. That was all she had. His hands trembled as he watched the camera feed, but what he saw made his blood run cold. The orca was still there. It wasn't leaving. It was waiting. A gut-wrenching realization slammed into him. It's not letting her go. The boat's captain, a grizzled man with decades of experience, turned sharply. What the hell do you mean? Ryan's eyes didn't leave the screen. He had seen footage of orcas playing with their prey before. Not killing, not eating, just playing. Tossing seals into the air, dragging them under, letting them think they had escaped, only to pull them back into the depths over and over again. A sickening game. And right now, Emily was the plaything. "Send the second dive team," Ryan ordered, his voice sharp, commanding. No. Emily's vision blurred at the edges, a deadly haze creeping in as her body fought against the overwhelming pressure. The way the ocean felt heavier now, pressing against her skull, crushing her chest. She was close, too close, to blacking out. Her thoughts were fading, scattering like sand in the tide. "I don't want to die here." A dark shape moved beside her, a phantom in the water. The orca's sleek form glided past, impossibly smooth, impossibly silent. It was watching, studying, deciding, and then it left. The massive body turned and swam upward, toward the fading sunlight. Emily's mind barely registered it at first. The pressure in her chest was unbearable, her body begging her to inhale, even though she knew it would mean her end. But then her instincts cut through the fog. "This is your chance." Move? No. With the last of her energy, she kicked upward, pushing toward the surface. Her limbs felt heavy, her strength almost gone. The depth had drained her, stolen every ounce of her fight. Almost there. Almost. A shadow blocked the light above. Her heart stopped. The orca was waiting for her. The water trembled as it opened its jaws. And for the first time, Emily knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't play. It wanted her. A final surge of desperation shot through her. She reached for her emergency inflator, fumbling with numb fingers. She barely managed to press it before. The orca launched. A flash of white and black. A final, crushing force. The world vanished. The first recovery diver hit the water in less than a minute. Ryan stood at the edge of the boat, his fingernails digging into the metal railing, eyes locked on the waves. Every second felt like an eternity. Then a body surfaced. There. Get her out. The crew rushed forward, dragging Emily's limp form onto the deck. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't moving. Her dive suit was torn, deep red spreading through the fabric. Her mask had been ripped away, her skin ashen and cold. The medic pushed through the crowd, dropping to her side. "She's not breathing." Stark compressions. Ryan fell to his knees beside her, his hand shaking as he reached for her wrist. No pulse. His throat clenched. "Come on, Emily," he whispered. "Come back." The medic worked frantically, counting each compression, each breath. The crew stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. And then a gasp. Emily's body convulsed as she sucked in a ragged breath, her eyes flying open. The air filled with shouts of relief, but Ryan barely heard them. His chest ached with the force of his own heartbeat. Emily's gaze flickered toward him, her lips parting as if to speak. Then she screamed. Not from pain, not from fear, but because even though she was safe, she knew it wasn't over. Emily's scream tore through the air, raw and guttural, sending a shiver down the spines of everyone on the boat. She wasn't just gasping for breath, she was screaming in terror. Her wide, panic-stricken eyes darted frantically around her, as if she were still trapped in the depths of the ocean, still being dragged into the abyss. Ryan knelt beside her, hands gripping her shoulders. "Emily, you're okay. You're on the boat." His voice was urgent, desperate to break through the haze of fear gripping her. But she wasn't hearing him. She was somewhere else. Emily's body trembled violently as she struggled to form words, her lips parting in broken, incoherent gasps. Her fingers dug into the wet deck beneath her, as if trying to anchor herself to reality. Ryan tightened his grip. "Emily, talk to me. What happened down there?" Her breath hitched, and for a moment, it seemed like she would answer. But instead, she turned her head sharply toward the water. The ocean stretched out before them, dark and endless. Too quiet, too still. And then, in a whisper so faint Ryan almost didn't hear it, Emily spoke. "It's still here." His blood ran cold. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The medic, still hovering over Emily, looked at Ryan. "We need to get her below deck. She's in shock." Ryan barely registered the words. His eyes remained locked on Emily's, wild, unfocused, and filled with something beyond fear. Something deeper. Something he couldn't understand. Then she grabbed his arm with a grip so tight it hurt. "Ryan," she rasped, "don't let it take me back." His stomach twisted. "Take you back?" She didn't answer, but her eyes flickered toward the water again. And Ryan, for the first time in his life, felt afraid of the ocean. Below deck, the medical team worked quickly, checking Emily's vitals, wrapping her in warm blankets, administering oxygen. Her body was still in shock, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She flinched at every sound, her gaze darting to the small round porthole that overlooked the sea. Ryan sat beside her, trying to get her to speak. She hadn't said anything else since those chilling words. "Emily," he tried again, voice low, steady. "Tell me what happened. What did you see?" She closed her eyes, shaking her head. "Emily." Finally she spoke. "It wasn't hunting me." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. It wasn't just an attack. It could have killed me any time it wanted to. It wasn't trying to kill me." Ryan leaned forward. "Then what was it doing?" Emily exhaled shakily. "It was taking me somewhere." Silence. The word sent a chill down Ryan's spine. "Taking you where?" Emily didn't answer. Or maybe she couldn't. The storm hit later that night. Thick clouds rolled in over the open sea, swallowing the horizon in a shroud of darkness. The wind howled through the rigging, the waves turning violent as the boat rocked against the tide. Rain lashed against the metal deck, and the crew worked tirelessly to secure their equipment, tying down whatever wasn't already bolted in place. Ryan stood near the helm, his jaw clenched as he watched the sea through the windshield. Something about this storm felt wrong. Like it had come out of nowhere. Like it had followed them. The captain adjusted his hat, gripping the wheel tighter as the vessel rocked beneath them. "Never seen a storm roll in this fast," he muttered. "This wasn't on the radar." Ryan didn't answer, because his mind was elsewhere. Emily. She had been placed in one of the sleeping quarters, the medic keeping a close eye on her condition. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That she wasn't just recovering. That something else was happening. And then a scream ripped through the ship. Ryan was already moving before he registered it was Emily. He burst into the room to find Emily thrashing against the bed, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The medic was trying to hold her down. "She's having some kind of episode." She woke up screaming. Ryan rushed forward, grabbing Emily's wrists. "Emily, wake up." Her head snapped toward him, and for a split second, her expression wasn't her own. Her pupils were blown wide, her irises almost swallowed by the darkness. Her skin looked pale, too pale, like the blood had drained from her body. Her lips trembled as she stared at him. Then her voice came out, not as a scream, not as a cry, but as a whisper. "It's calling me." Ryan's grip tightened. "What's calling you?" She swallowed hard, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. The deep silence. The room suddenly felt too small, too claustrophobic. Ryan glanced at the medic, whose face had paled considerably. Emily shuddered violently. "I can hear it. I can still hear it. It's out there, Ryan. It's waiting for me." Ryan's breath was unsteady now. "Emily, nothing is waiting for you. You're safe." But even as he said the words, he wasn't sure if he believed them. Emily's eyes flickered to the porthole beside the bed. The storm raged outside. The sea churned. And just for a second, Ryan swore he saw something move beneath the waves. The storm lasted until dawn. By morning, the sea was eerily still again, as if nothing had ever happened. The sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light over the rippling water. But the crew was on edge. Emily was calmer now, but she refused to go near the water. She sat on the deck, wrapped in a heavy coat, her arms curled around her knees. She hadn't spoken much since the night before. Ryan sat beside her. Emily, we need to talk about what happened. She exhaled slowly. Then, finally, she turned to him. I think it let me go, she said softly. But I don't think it's finished with me. Ryan frowned. What does that mean? Emily's gaze was distant. I think it's still watching. Ryan looked toward the water. It was calm, too calm. And deep below, in the endless darkness, something waited. The sun rose higher, casting golden streaks across the rolling waves. The storm had passed, but its presence still lingered in the form of a deep, unsettling stillness that clung to the boat and the people aboard it. No one spoke much. Even the usual sounds, the distant calls of seabirds, the rhythmic creak of the ship, felt muted, almost drowned out by something unseen. Emily sat on the deck, staring at the water, her fingers clenched tightly around the edges of her coat. She hadn't moved in over an hour. Ryan crouched beside her, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. Emily, you haven't said a word since this morning. She blinked slowly, then exhaled. I'm listening. Ryan frowned. Listening for what? She swallowed hard. For it. The words sat heavy between them. Ryan glanced at the sea. Emily, nothing is out there. Whatever happened, whatever that thing did to you, it's over. Emily didn't look convinced. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. I need you to tell me everything, from the moment you went under. Emily hesitated, her fingers twitching slightly against the fabric of her coat. She looked up at Ryan, something haunted in her gaze. It didn't just pull me down, she whispered. It took me somewhere. Ryan tensed. What do you mean? She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. I saw something, Ryan. Down there, in the deep. It wasn't just darkness. It was something else. Ryan felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. What did you see? Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, her head snapped to the side, her eyes locking onto the water. Ryan followed her gaze, and his breath caught. The surface of the ocean wasn't empty. A shadow loomed just beneath the waves, massive and unmoving, and it was staring back at them. The crew scrambled as soon as the first shadow appeared. The boat was already preparing to head back to shore, but now no one dared to move. Is that another orca? One of the deckhands whispered, leaning over the railing. Ryan grabbed a pair of binoculars, his heart hammering. From above, the shape was massive. Too big for a regular orca. Emily stood beside him, her breathing uneven. It's back, she murmured. It found me. The water rippled, and for a split second, the shape moved. Ryan dropped the binoculars. We need to get out of here. No. The captain, who had been silent up until now, gave him a sharp look. You think it's dangerous? Ryan turned to Emily, who still hadn't torn her gaze away from the water. Emily, he pressed. Is that the same one? Her lips trembled. Then she gave a slow nod. Ryan's stomach dropped. Then we don't wait, he snapped. We leave now. The crew sprang into action. Engines roared to life, the boat lurching forward as they made for open waters. But as soon as they moved, so did the shadow. It was following them, and it was getting closer. The waves churned violently, the sea seemingly twisting beneath them. Ryan gripped the railing, his heart slamming against his ribs as the orca, or whatever it was, moved with terrifying speed. It's chasing us, one of the crew shouted. Emily swayed slightly, eyes locked on the water. It doesn't want me to leave. Ryan grabbed her wrist. Emily, snap out of it. She turned to him, startled, her expression unreadable. You're safe, he said firmly. Whatever it is, we're getting away from it. But even as he spoke, the boat shuddered. A sickening thud vibrated through the hull. Something had hit them. Hard. The captain cursed. We just lost speed. Engines struggling. Ryan's pulse spiked. What do you mean, struggling? Before the captain could answer, another impact rocked the boat. The crew stumbled, gripping onto anything they could. And Emily collapsed to her knees, clutching her head. Ryan knelt beside her. Emily? What's wrong? Her eyes were wide, filled with something that wasn't entirely fear, but recognition. It's calling me again, she rasped. Ryan barely had time to react before a deafening crack split through the air. The boat tilted sharply to the side, and Emily was gone. Time slowed. One second, she was there. The next, she was in the water. Ryan's breath left his body as he lunged toward the railing, his heart seizing in sheer panic. Emily. The sea swallowed her whole. The crew rushed to the side, throwing ropes, screaming her name. But Emily didn't surface. Ryan's mind went blank, his body moving on pure instinct. Before anyone could stop him, he jumped. The water was colder than before, deeper, darker. Ryan kicked, eyes burning, searching for any sign of her. Then he saw her. Emily wasn't struggling. She wasn't even swimming. She was suspended in the water, her body completely still. And just beyond her, the shadow. Ryan's stomach clenched. The orca was right there. But it wasn't attacking. It was just watching. Emily's body shifted slightly, her eyes open, her expression eerily calm. Ryan reached for her, grabbing her wrist. But as soon as he touched her, her body convulsed. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp. And then she spoke. But her voice was wrong. It was layered, echoing, like something else was speaking through her. You shouldn't have come down here. Ryan's blood turned to ice. Emily's head tilted slightly, her pupils blown wide. It let me go before, she whispered. But now, it's taking me back. Then the orca moved. It surged forward with impossible speed. Ryan grabbed Emily's arm just as the water exploded around them. A force ripped her away. Ryan barely had time to process what was happening before. Darkness consumed them both. The ocean was silent once more. The boat drifted, engines failing, the crew staring in horror at the empty waves. There was no sign of Ryan. No sign of Emily. Only the endless sea. Waiting. The ocean swallowed them whole. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. The cold grip of the deep tightening around Ryan's body like an unrelenting vice. He couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't hear anything except the muffled roar of water rushing past his ears. Emily was gone. She had been there just seconds ago, in his grasp real, tangible. And then something had taken her. He kicked hard, forcing himself downward into the black abyss. His lungs screamed for air, his heart pounded in his chest, but nothing mattered except finding her. Then a flicker of movement. Ryan turned sharply, scanning the darkness. A shadow glided past, sleek and monstrous. The orca. It was still there, watching, waiting. And beside it, Emily. She floated, suspended in the water, her body eerily still, her arms outstretched as if weightless. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't moving. Ryan's breath hitched in his throat. No. She's not. He surged forward, fighting against the crushing pressure, the suffocating weight of the ocean pressing down on him. He reached out, his fingers grazing her arm. Emily's eyes snapped toward him. Then she smiled. Ryan froze. Something was wrong. Emily had been fighting before, terrified, desperate to escape. But now she looked peaceful. No, not peaceful. Resigned. Ryan shook his head, gripping her wrist, trying to pull her upward. Come on, Emily. Come back. But she didn't move. She just stared at him. And then she spoke. But her voice wasn't her own. You shouldn't have come down here, Ryan. A shiver ripped through him. Emily's lips moved, but the voice was layered, hollow, impossibly deep. It was never yours to take. Ryan stared in horror. What is she talking about? Emily's expression didn't change. She lifted a hand, palm against his chest, and then a force slammed into him from below. Ryan's body shot upward, an invisible current hurling him toward the surface with inhuman speed. His mind whirled, spiraling between reality and nightmare. What had just happened? What was wrong with Emily? The orca, was it controlling her? Was it keeping her? His chest ached, his body screamed for oxygen, but he fought to stay conscious. The last thing he saw was Emily's face disappearing into the dark, her lips still parted, whispering words he couldn't hear. Then his head broke the surface. The crew screamed his name as they yanked him onto the boat, his body crashing onto the deck in a soaking, gasping heap. Where is she? Someone shouted. Ryan couldn't answer. He couldn't breathe. Rough hands flipped him onto his side, forcing the seawater from his lungs. Everything spun. The sky above him blurred into streaks of gray and blue. Ryan. The voice was distant, frantic, but all he could hear was Emily's whisper echoing in his skull. It was never yours to take. Ryan coughed, his throat raw, his body trembling violently. He forced himself up, gripping the deck railing. Emily, his voice cracked. She's still down there. The captain, face pale, gripped his shoulder. Ryan, listen to me. We searched. She's gone. Ryan's breath hitched. No, she's not. He turned wildly toward the water. She's still there. She's alive. The crew exchanged nervous glances. The medics stepped forward. Ryan, I need you to calm down. Calm down. Calm down. Emily was gone. Not dead. Taken. No one understood. No one saw what he saw. Ryan turned to the captain, his chest heaving. We have to go back down. The captain shook his head. You barely made it out alive. I'm not sending anyone else into that water. But she's not dead. Ryan yelled, gripping the man's jacket. You don't understand. I understand fine, the captain snapped, eyes sharp. I've been at sea for over 20 years, and I know when something doesn't want to be found. Ryan stiffened. The captain's expression was unreadable, but his grip on Ryan's wrist was firm. Too firm. You saw it too, Ryan whispered. The captain didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Night fell. The ship remained anchored in the open sea, the crew too shaken to risk moving further until daylight. No one spoke of what had happened. No one spoke of Emily. Ryan sat alone on the deck, staring at the black waves stretching endlessly into the horizon. Every instinct told him to jump back in, to go after her. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter, because whatever had taken her had already decided. She was never coming back. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., something broke the silence. A sound, low, echoing, a whale song. Ryan froze. The crew had gone below deck. He was alone, and yet he wasn't. The sound rolled through the water, deep and mournful, vibrating against the ship's metal hull. Ryan's pulse pounded. He stood slowly, stepping toward the railing. The ocean was black, empty. Then shadow. It was back. The Orca. It surfaced slowly, its slick black skin gleaming under the dim moonlight. Ryan's breath hitched, and then he saw it, clutched gently between its massive teeth. Something small, something human. Ryan's heart stopped. It was Emily's dive camera. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The Orca hovered there, staring at him, holding the camera like an offering, or a message. Ryan's fingers tightened around the railing. Slowly, the Orca opened its mouth. The camera sank into the water, disappearing beneath the waves. Ryan lunged forward, but it was already gone. The Orca lingered for just a second longer. Then, without a sound, it vanished into the deep. Ryan stood there, frozen, staring into the black abyss. And finally, he understood. Emily wasn't coming back, because she didn't belong to them anymore. She belonged to the deep, and it had claimed her. Here is Batch 6, final 1,500 words, the script in flowing paragraphs. The ocean was still. The Orca was gone. And yet, Ryan remained frozen at the railing, his mind screaming for him to do something, anything, but his body refused to move. His fingers trembled, his knuckles white from gripping the metal, but he couldn't bring himself to step back. Not after what he had just seen. Emily's dive camera. It had been right there, clutched between the Orca's teeth, as if it were delivering a message. But why? Was it guilt? A warning? A final goodbye? Ryan's stomach twisted, nausea creeping up his throat. None of this made sense. Emily had been down there for hours now. She should have drowned. No one could survive in the open ocean for that long. Not against the currents, the cold, impossible depths. And yet, something inside him whispered that she wasn't dead. Not in the way that mattered. But that didn't mean she was coming back. Morning broke slowly, the first streaks of gold cutting across the endless horizon. The crew emerged in silence, their faces drawn and exhausted. No one asked Ryan about what happened last night. Maybe they already knew. Maybe they had heard the whale song, felt the eerie stillness of the water, even as the storm had long since passed. Or maybe they were simply too afraid to ask. The ship's engines rumbled to life, and as the boat finally began moving toward the mainland, Ryan felt an unbearable weight settle in his chest. This was it. They were leaving. Without her. The thought made his throat tighten. Emily had been his best friend. And now she was just, gone. Or worse, she wasn't. And that was what terrified him most. Hours later, the research vessel docked at the marina, but Ryan barely noticed the movement beneath his feet. The moment the ship was secured, the captain approached him, his face unreadable. "You need to rest," the older man said. Ryan shook his head. "I need answers." The captain exhaled through his nose, his expression tightening. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "there aren't any." Ryan turned away without responding, because he knew that was a lie. There were answers out there. He just wasn't sure if he wanted to find them. Days passed, then weeks. Emily was declared officially lost at sea. A memorial was held, a modest service attended by family, friends, and colleagues who spoke about her passion for the ocean, her kindness, her bravery. Ryan sat in the back silent. He didn't say a word when people called her death a tragedy, because deep down, he wasn't sure she was dead at all. The nightmares started soon after. They weren't violent. There was no drowning, no struggle, no pain. Only the sound of the water. And Emily's voice, whispering from the deep. "Come back. It's waiting for you. You have to see." He woke up gasping every night, the echo of whale song fading from his ears. But it wasn't just in his dreams. The same sound, low, mournful, haunting, followed him. No matter where he went, he would hear it. A whisper in the wind. Distant hum in the harbor. Even when the waters were calm, the song never stopped. Ryan knew what it meant. He just wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. It was exactly 40 days after Emily disappeared when Ryan finally broke. The nightmares, the whispers, the undeniable pull of the ocean became too much. So he did what he swore he would. He got on a boat, alone, and he went back. Back to where it happened. Back to where she had been taken. The sea was calm when he arrived, as if it had been waiting for him. Ryan dropped anchor and stood at the edge of the boat, staring into the endless blue. His heart pounded. He had no plan, no backup, no radio contact. Just the overwhelming need to know. Was she still here? And if she was, what had she become? The sun began to set, and as the sky darkened, the first notes of the whale song filled the air. Ryan's breath hitched. It was louder this time, closer, and then the water moved. His stomach clenched as a familiar shape surfaced just ahead of him. The Orca. It was the same one. The same cold, black eyes. The same impossible presence. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to move, to step back, to turn the boat around and never return. But then something else surfaced. Something that made his breath stop completely. A hand, pale, human, reaching up through the waves. Ryan's vision blurred. No. The Orca moved slightly, its massive form shifting in the water. And for the first time in 40 days, he saw her. Emily. She was there, rising slowly from the deep, her body eerily still, her hair floating around her like seaweed. Ryan's entire body locked in place. She was alive, but not. Her skin was too pale, too smooth, too unnatural. And when she opened her eyes, they were black. Just like the Orcas. Just like the deep. She smiled softly, and then she spoke. Ryan. His knees almost buckled. The voice, it was hers, but not. There was something else inside of it. Something ancient. Something endless. You finally came back. Ryan's breathing was shallow, ragged. His entire body screamed for him to run, to leave, to never return. But he couldn't. Because deep down, he knew this was always going to happen. He had never escaped. Not really. Emily raised a hand, palm up, inviting him in. Come see. Ryan took a slow step forward. Then another. The waves lapped gently against the boat. The Orca waited. And Ryan made his choice. He stepped off the boat and into the deep. The boat drifted for days before it was finally found. Empty. No signs of struggle. No distress calls. No Ryan. Only the endless sea. Waiting.